Good morning, Masters and Doctoral PhD students. It is my pleasure to spend some time with you from 9 to 12. Thank you, Tony, for the thorough introduction. I appreciate that. As we mentioned, I'm here to facilitate the session with you. The PowerPoint presentation will be available for you. It is comprehensive, so I advise you to keep it at hand while you are working on your proposal and to refer back to it. I made it as practical as possible with examples for you to assist you during the writing process. Now, I also want to mention that English is for the majority of us not our first language. For me, it's my second language. Afrikaans is my first language, so I sometimes find it challenging to write in English, and I have to think carefully of the message that I would like to convey. So if English is not your first language, I share your sentiments, and this will really help you and help to build your academic career and will definitely assist you on your journey. I hope you are ready for the information that you are going to receive. It's quite a lot, but you will keep up with me. Post your questions and we will attend to that as well. And I would just urge you to make sure that your video is not switched on because it takes a lot of data and it makes the presentation quite slower. So please make sure that your video option is switched off so that we can deal with this presentation as productively as possible. I hope you can all hear me and I'm ready for you. I hope you are ready for me and enjoy the session. Right, you will see on your screen the presentation. I'm going to put it now to the slideshow mode and then you will be able to follow with me. I welcomed you to the session. You've seen on the program that is academic writing skills, and this is what we are going to focus on. Now, very important is what is academic writing and what skills do you need to be considered a good academic writer. Now, remember that there's a difference between writing a WhatsApp message to your friends or your colleagues. When you write an essay or an email, we use different types of languages and tones. So with academic writing, it's more formal. So you will have to adapt to the way of academic writing. When your supervisor or supervisors provide you with feedback and comments and mention that the academic writing is not on par of what you were supposed to submit, then you know this is what is referred to. What is academic writing? Firstly, your message should be clear. What you convey must be concise, it should be focused and structured. Now, all of those should be backed up by evidence, especially on master's level, where you don't provide your inputs as much or your experiences as much as theory and literature, where we are able to determine exactly what the message is that you would like to convey. So this is the criteria that we as supervisors look for, and your examiners will also look for these different criteria when they examine your dissertation and your thesis when you're done with your research journey. But for now, we focus on the proposal, so please make sure that you keep all these elements in mind. Now we are going to look at different characteristics of academic writing. As I mentioned on the previous slide, it should be planned and focused. Now, advice that I can give you is to don't just jump in and type left, right, and center in a document. Have a separate document or a page, a blank page next to you. Plan your paragraphs. We are going to get to that a little bit later on in the presentation. Plan exactly what you would like to convey. We also say that you must cover one topic or element per paragraph. Otherwise, your reader gets confused. So to plan exactly what you would like to convey in a paragraph or in a section is very important. You can also have some questions for you, and you can tick it down and make sure that you adhere to the characteristics of paragraphs and contents. So firstly, it should be planned and focused. You need to answer the questions, and you must be able to demonstrate an understanding of the subject or the content of that particular paragraph. Then it should be structured. We are going to look at the structure in a little while. Should be coherent. You must be able to write in a logical order, and it must bring all the points and material related to that specific topic together. Evidence, you need to back up everything with evidence, all your arguments, and it should be referenced accordingly. You will get feedback that from your supervisors, where exactly do you get this information from? So that is important that you provide evidence. On PhD level, we expect students to provide evidence from more than one source. So don't stick like the master students on one source only or two. You need to read widely, and you must be able to back up your statements with as much evidence as possible. So you need to reference the scholars in that field that wrote and did research on a specific topic. Then formal tone and style. You must use appropriate language and tenses. Now the tenses might sometimes be a challenge, and it should be clear. It should be concise. You remember from the previous slide that one of the elements is that it should be concise, and also the content that you reveal must be balanced. You mustn't over-focus on one thing. You must make sure that there is a balance. You remember at the beginning when I dealt with the characteristics, I said that a piece of paper next to you is very handy. That is what I do, is I have a piece of paper next to me and I plan exactly what must be in a section. Then I break it down to what must be in a paragraph, and I make sure that I cover specific content per paragraph. Remember, it must be interlinked. So it mustn't be separate paragraphs that cover different topics. You must lead from one paragraph to the other. So at the end of a section or a chapter, you must tell a story. There must be a golden thread throughout the chapter or throughout your proposal. We need to, when we review your proposal, we need to be able to see exactly the starting point and where you envisage to finish your study. So it provides us with a brief overview of exactly what you want to study, what you want to research, where are you starting from, and where you envisage to go with this particular study. So that is what we look for when we review, and your supervisors will also look for that, and that is very crucial criteria. I hope that I'm not going too fast and that you are following me. Remember to post your comments, and we will try to address that at the end of this session. Sorry, I just want to see mine is stuck now. Okay, great. Now, what is academic writing? It's fundamentally a question of form rather than function. To develop sound and logical arguments, I mentioned arguments in the previous slide, checking your grammar. You need to cite references correctly depending on the method of citation. Should it be a Harvard method? Should it be APA? Should it be Chicago method? It depends on what the prescribed format of your college is. Also that of the university. So it depends, your supervisor will guide you there on the required format, how to cite correctly. There's also on the library site where there is library guides available for you. There's also guides on different styles of referencing. Whenever you are in doubt, please go to the library site to the section that mentions library guides. I know that there's a section on Harvard referencing for the university and APA. So just go and look for that folder and you'll be able to get examples there. What I also advise you to do, stick to the same method, don't swap around different methods, and also download that file so that you save it in your folder that you title references so that you have your guide with you to refer to. You must stick to a required format so that you don't end up with different arguments. So there must be an argument per paragraph. You just make your argument clearer, that's important. It must be more rigorous and easier to understand. Remember, there's nothing as challenging for a supervisor to try to decipher exactly what the message is that the student tried to convey. So that's why I say stick to one topic per chapter. If you need to integrate topics, then you do so as well. But remember to present the basics first. So especially for master's candidates, that is very important. There's nothing as frustrating for supervisors to try to decipher exactly what the message is that the candidate tried to convey. So it makes us a bit mixed up and we are not clear exactly what you would like to convey. So make sure that it's rigorous, that's academic writing, and we on the other side need to find it easy to understand what the message is that you would like to convey to us. Right, let's go on. Now, if we look at style, structure, words, and terms, now I've got something for you here. It is much more difficult to write something that is easy to read than to write something that is difficult to read. Remember this statement that I've provided you here. You will experience it throughout your journey. We sometimes have information in our head and in our mind, and then we struggle to put it down in writing. As soon as that happens, take your piece of rough work paper, write, rewrite, continue writing so that you make sure that the message is clear. So I'm reading this again to you. It's much more difficult to write something that is easy to read. Remember, what you have in mind and what you have in your head and your terms of reference might be easy for you to understand. But for us on the other side, as your supervisors and the reviewers, might find it challenging. So make sure that what you have, you convey it in such a way that we can easily understand the essence of the content. Now, if we look at styles and sentences, I'm going to touch on and I'm going to give you practical examples. I advise you to go through this, keep it at hand. You can refer back to this as often as possible. I suggest that once in 2 weeks, you just read through this presentation just to give you a refresher, because it happens sometimes that you get stuck. Just to give you an example, when I write articles for different journals, each journal has got different styles and guidelines. Also different language or dictionaries that they make use of. So I often take out this presentation of mine and I go back to it just to make sure that I'm on the right track. So even though I'm an experienced academic and researcher, I also go back to the basics. Sorry, as I mentioned, that English is not my first language. So in order to avoid that, I go back to this presentation. So I try to compile it as thorough as possible. At the end of this presentation, you are welcome to post in the comment section any other topics that you would like me to add to this presentation and what you feel wasn't relevant. So I really value anything else that I didn't cover, and then I can incorporate that for the future. So I will really appreciate that. Right, let's go. Your starting writing style should be formal with an academic tone. Remember that I said it's the opposite of when you're writing informal content like an email or a WhatsApp or an essay. So the advice that I can give you there is that rather in academic writing, use full words instead of sort of combining two words. The example that I've got for you there is do not. This is the better way to write it instead of don't with the apostrophe T. It's like can, not, and let us instead of let's. So you get the idea. I think the message is quite clear. Avoid strong adjectives such as huge, excellent. I apologize for that. Remember one thing, that fancy words does not really contribute towards the essence of the message that you would like to convey. I sometimes see that when I write emails. I've got a software program that is titled Grammarly. I will also give you information on that as well. And sometimes, whenever I find myself that I insert or include words, strong adjectives that's not really relevant, it will advise me to remove that. So just be wary of that, that you don't include strong adjectives that doesn't really contribute. In our normal conversations with people, it's easy to say that I had a huge piece of cake. This is a huge matter to deal with, but there's other ways to say it. You can either leave the word huge out. It doesn't really contribute. Then be specific. Make a statement or omit a statement. Do not soften it with words like actually or really. Doesn't really contribute towards the essence of the message that you would like to convey. So just make sure that there's certain words that doesn't really contribute and rather to omit that. When you send your proposal, it must be language edited. It depends on the guidelines of your college where you conduct your study. But I know in the department and college that I am involved in, the proposal must be language edited. So they will also pick up content like this, and the language editor will remove it. Then words such as however, nevertheless, and although can add value to what the message is that you would like to convey. So these are academically sound words that looks nice and neat, and it contributes to the end result. Also, avoid words like in addition. Rather use furthermore or moreover. I hope you can by now catch the drift that there is words that's more academically sound, and then there's words that doesn't really contribute to the academic end result of your product. Then this is a matter that we struggle with, especially with master students. Avoid sweeping statements. Now, before I continue with the example that I have here, what is a sweeping statement? It is something that you can't really find, or you don't find it in literature. It is something that you make up. Sometimes it derives out of experience. We find that very often with our students that is in the working environment. They see a problem and then they make a sweeping statement to demonstrate the problem. So don't make sweeping statements. Remember that content needs to be backed up by reference, especially on master's degree. On PhD level, you are allowed to add your own voice to summarize content from literature, and just make sure that you do not include sweeping statements. You are welcome to Google example of sweeping statement. There's quite a lot. and then you can just get an idea of different examples and how you should go around with it to make sure that you don't make yourself guilty of that. Your supervisor will also comment in track changes that you have included a sweeping statement. Whenever you are lost, just go and Google and make sure. The example I've got here for you, implementation of the XYZ strategy in middle management can transform retail banking. Do you have evidence to back this up? If your answer is yes, then you need to include references. If you don't have anything, remember to regard it as a sweeping statement. Then I've included for you here different types of verbs. Now, this is something that students struggle, especially if English is not your first language. Remember that I also indicated to you that English is not my first language. So if I don't speak English for quite a while, I think I immediately go in discussions and conversations by thinking in my Afrikaans frame of reference, and then I have to translate it in my mind to English. And then sometimes I get stuck. So English is a skill that we need to practice on and that you need to master. Now, luckily, there's tools that help us. So make sure I'll also provide you with an additional document that I distribute to my students, and the feedback that I get back is that it helps them a great deal. I also make that available for you. I also advise you to save it. It can come in handy. Now we have three types of verbs. We have descriptive verbs, analytical verbs, and evaluative verbs. Now that depends on the type of content that you deal with. Now, I'm just going to read the first two or three. You will get the drift. When it's descriptive, you say person A, or say, for example, van Antwerpen, and then in brackets, the year of publication is 2020, close the brackets, states. Or you can say reports if you report on findings, or describes. And if sometimes when you deal with definitions, these can come in handy. If you look just a little bit downwards, you find the word defines. So when you deal with a definition, you will rather than use the descriptive word defines. So what I find very often, especially with inexperienced students, especially in the beginning with your master's journey, is that students tend to use the same descriptive words or verbs right through a section. Make sure that you alternate them, that you don't use the same over and over again. What I do is that I take a verb and I conduct a search. Sometimes I am really amazed at how many times students use one verb, for example, like states or reports. Then I sometimes count that they used it in a chapter about 30 times. It is going to irritate the examiner. So please make sure that from the onset, you alternate them, decide which of those descriptive words will best meet the message that you would like to convey. So that is good advice that I'm going to give you. And then also if we look at analytical, if it's something that a study was conducted already, a verb like assumes or compares or explains or according to, suggests, or in the view of, in this case, van Antwerpen, and then in brackets the year. So alternate them, look at which is the most applicable to the sentence and the message you would like to convey. Then evaluative is like, for example, affirms, agree, confirms. If you evaluate 2 different or 3 different contents or findings from different researchers, You can say that they confirm after a research study, or they makes clear, depending on it, one or multiple authors, or they concur with a specific finding. If they've read it in another place in literature, they can say that they concur with what the findings are. All right. I'm going to step down from this one. You can go back to this and it will really benefit you. Now, if we look at styles and sentences, don't be too rigid, too strict or rigid or dogmatic. That is what we refer to in academic writing. So always remember that you need to convey a message. You need to do that with an open mind and an open heart. You are going to evaluate content. You are going to make sure that you summarize it and that you get the essence out of what is published, especially in your literature review chapter. You might have one chapter or two chapters. It depends on your study. Very often in a master's qualification, there is one literature chapter, but when it becomes more complex with your PhD students and there's multiple variables that will be investigated, I sometimes strongly advise my students to have two literature chapters, especially if it's different constructs that need to be addressed. Then avoid overuse of a term. I explained to you in 2 slides ago that I did a search and I do a search to make sure that students don't overuse the same term like states, for example, several times or multiple times. It can become a problem. Also, I find that my students, especially in the beginning, if they are not so experienced, they use the same verb 3 times in a short paragraph. Now, that is a problem. So just make sure that you are not guilty of that. Be careful of repetition or duplication of a point. Again, that is where your rough work paper comes in handy. You construct a paragraph there. Make sure that you don't duplicate information. Eliminate duplication so that when you transfer it to your digital document or your online document, your Word document, so that you do not repeat information. It gives an immature impression. Rather combine sentences that say the same thing, convey the same message, and choose the best words, academic style words, to convey your message. Also, stay clear from sentences that are really long. What I do from my side, if I detect that there's a very long sentence, I highlight the sentence and I look at the word count. If I see that it's longer than 50 words, I rather advise the students to break up the sentence. Because otherwise it's very long, the message gets lost and the reader completely gets lost in translation. So stay clear from that. Also, one idea or piece of information per sentence. So just make sure that you understand this principle. In general, paragraphs should not be short. They should not contain only 1 or 2 sentences. That's sometimes things that we pick up. Don't have a paragraph or a short paragraph with 1 sentence only. Rather join it with a previous paragraph or add some more content so that the paragraph is not that short. With that, I don't mean have an extensive paragraph to convey 1 short idea. So just make sure that it's not 1 sentence. That's a no-go. And the reviewers are also going to comment on that. We are still continuing with styles and sentences. I'm also going to touch on this a little bit later. Remember that I said that you need to get the guidelines for referencing. I'm not going to go into depth with that. If you deal with multiple authors, in the beginning, initially, you need to cite all the surnames of the author. If it's one author, that's not a problem. If it's two authors, you stick to two authors. If it's three, you list all three at once initially when you use that for the first time. And then from there on, you can change the second and the third or the fourth. If there's four authors that you reflect on the content, you can substitute the last two or three with et al. That means that it substitutes the others. By listing it the first time, the reader will know exactly who they are, but we get lost when we review and examine your work or other people's work if they initially, from the onset, say the surname of the author and immediately use et al. And then we start wondering who's the rest of the authors. So to go then to your reference list is time consuming, and examiners really gets irritated with that. So just the golden rule is list them all at the beginning, and from there on go to et al. And there is two different methods to refer to et al. It's actually two Latin words. Now, normally Latin words and foreign language words are in italics. Now, it depends once again on the guidelines of your college or your department. It can be italics or it can be in normal text. It depends once again. Please just check after the last or the L of et al. That you can see a full stop there before you have the comma. Remember, it's an abbreviation, so you need the full stop there. So it can either be italics, as I mentioned, or normal text. So just find out. Good advice that I can give you is that don't mix the styles. Keep to the same style. If you use italics from the onset in your document, stick to that throughout your manuscript. Do not start a number or a question or a sentence, with a numeric number. For example, the first example says 9 participants agree. That is wrong. You need to write it in full. 9 participants agreed. So I hope you catch the drift there. So don't start with the numbers. Instead of to prevent that from happening, you can add a word before you have the number. Like, what can I say? Approximately 9 participants agree, or a total of 9 participants agree. This might be a ridiculous example, but it's just to illustrate to you what I mean by that. Shorter sentences make your work easier to understand. We sometimes think that we are going to impress the reader or your supervisor or examiners with lengthy sentences with huge words. Remember, that's not the case. Use the shortest way to convey a message, be to the point, say what you would like to say, and the reader will understand exactly what the message is that you try to convey. So be careful not to include very lengthy sentences. I also said to you previously that I count the words of the sentence. If it is too long, I advise my students to break it down because the essence of the sentence gets lost. Remove clutter words that do not add to the meaning. So sometimes people use words like we previously said, huge and extremely. There can be a lot of clutter words that doesn't really add to the essence and the meaning of what you would try to explain. Numbering subheadings. I'm also going on a second slide or on the next slide, going to give you an example on that. Number subheadings, for example, 2.2.1, and then you continue. Now, what I would like you to have a look at, I started here with 2. That means it is the numbering from chapter 2. Each chapter needs to start with a number of the chapter. So now we are dealing with chapter 2, but if you are dealing with chapter 3, you will then start with 3.1.1. 3.1.2. I think that you catch the drift here. It is to understand. Now, when you are busy with your proposal phase, remember, or your proposal, during your proposal phase, you are not going to number according to these. It will be number 1 because it's a proposal. So just remember it's number 1. If you use subheadings, you continue with number 1 and then just add the rest. Then the style of a paragraph. We start with a leading sentence that indicates exactly what the paragraph is about. So when I evaluate work, the first sentence of the paragraph must explain to me what the content is that's going to follow. So I need to know exactly what the candidate tried to convey. What is the essence of a particular paragraph? So that is your lead sentence. Then you need to make an argument by using a pattern. Assertion, then evidence, and agree or affirmation discussion. You either agree with it or you disagree, and then you need to provide evidence why you agree and why you don't agree. This is especially crucial with PhD students, where you need to incorporate literature from various authors, and that you also need to argue on do you agree? Say, for example, we look at a definition. You've got 3 different definitions. You can compile a definition from that and say that from that point onward, your study will go with this definition, or you can identify one of the definitions and you justify that this is the definition that your study will be following due to A, B, and C reasons. Right. Mention contradictory beliefs and counter arguments. I've touched on that when I explained to you when you make an argument to use the pattern as explained. Everything is possible. Examiners do not find it credible. So your mention contradictory beliefs and counter argument. If everything is possible, examiners do not find it credible. So everything is not always positive. There is a negative side to that as well. So you must read wide enough so that you can give the positives and the negatives, and then come up with an argument to state with what you go with, and also argue with how and why you follow that particular statement or argument. Still on styles and sentences. Say, for example, you would like to change. Remember that I said that it's really handy to have a piece of rough work where you construct your paragraph by writing the key terminology before you fill in the flesh of that paragraph. You are going to rewrite that several times until it's perfect. Then you are going to submit it to your supervisors and they are going to critique on that. So that is how it works in academic writing and during your research journey. You must have a thick skin because you are not going to always receive the feedback that you anticipate to receive. Now, say for example, you have a sentence that you have typed and that you realize, okay, I mentioned that this is the state of affairs and that due to A, B, C and whatever. Now you decide, okay, you want to move due to A, B and C to be placed earlier in your sentence. Okay, what do we normally do? We go and highlight that section that you would like to move, and you go and cut and paste it and include it in the right spot where you think it should be in your paragraph. Now that can be dangerous, and I experienced it myself. As soon as you cut and paste it, the section in the sentence where you removed it from is going to disappear, and it's sometimes difficult to determine exactly where you cut it from. So my advice to students is the following: rather use the copy option. So it remains where you copied it from. Then you read the sentence the way you altered it and to make sure that it really makes sense. If you are satisfied with where you included the section, then you can go back to the original section and you then can go and delete. Sorry, people, I apologize that I've got flu, so please bear with me, I'm sorry. Right, that's what I've explained to you here. Rather use the move and paste, copy and paste, sorry, than to cut and paste. Although it leaves a gap, go and delete the extra spaces where you copied it from. I hope this explanation makes sense. If you struggle with that, you are welcome to send me an email and I can give you an example. It is difficult in the PowerPoint presentation. So if you struggle with that, if there's still some time left, I can give you a word explanation or an example of how this works. Still on times and styles and sentences. If it's time to change something, the implication of changing or adding new information, you need to reread the whole section where you added something to check if the golden thread is still intact. That is what I mentioned on the previous slide, where you move information. Just make sure, read it, reread it to make sure that it really makes sense. What makes sense in your head, especially if you are busy and struggling with a specific section for quite a while, might not be the same case when somebody else reads it. So what I try to do is if I get stuck, I would give it to one of my peers and tell them that this is the message that I would like to convey. I send them the paragraph and ask them to read through it to make sure that they understand what I'm doing. And I'm also trying to make use of my colleagues that English is their first language. It helps me a great deal. So you can also, if you are working, identify a colleague or just make sure, or somebody else to read it, you just make sure that you are on par. Make sure that the new content that you fit in the sentence makes sense. If it adds to the essence of the message that you would like to convey. Also be careful that you don't duplicate information, as mentioned previously, and then you might need to rephrase the text to make it flow. Especially if you cut and paste from different sections or paragraphs or content, just make sure that there is a logic flow and that everything makes sense. Still on structure, now we are going to look at sections and paragraphs. I've mentioned previously that you need to avoid long sections of text, pages and pages of text, rather subdivided. The reader gets tired, we lost track of the content of the paragraph, rather subdivided according to the theme and the leading sentence and the topic that you would like to cover in that specific section. We get tired by receiving information and documents that we have to review. It can be article form or chapters from students. It depends on, and there is no, and there's those lengthy paragraphs that we need to decipher what is going on where. Then also, if you use hierarchical subheaders, remember we dealt with 2.2.1, so that is a second layer subheading. If you go to fourth level headings, for example, 3.5.2.2, my advice to you is stay clear from going on to 5 levels. Then there's too much numbering. We don't normally include that in the table of contents, but it can become too much. Now I would like you to see that I've included 3.5.2.2. Can you see that there is a full stop at the end of the last two? I've highlighted in red. You are not allowed to add a full stop after the final number. Now you will also find that when you make use of styles, that's part of the MS Word program, that you are going to experience this problem. Sometimes the styles can create a lot of challenges. So make sure that if you use styles, that you are familiar with all the different features of MS Word and that you can use the program in its advanced functions. Right, you might prefer to go as far as third level subheaders, then use non-numbered, bold, italicized, or bold or italicized subheaders to subdivide text that rambles on. With that I mean, as previously said, if you have very long paragraphs and pages, rather include unnumbered sections where you use bold and italicized or bold or only italicized subheadings to divide text depending on the theme of a paragraph. Now, I also advise you to look at the guidelines provided by your college or your department. Just make sure what is the structure that they would like you to use. Some departments or colleges provide students with a template to conduct or to do their proposal. So just make sure that if you receive that you stick to the template. Then list of aspects or points in a sentence. It is acceptable to have a comma before the final, the word final, or the final and. Say, for example, you say, I am reading the following books that is colored in blue, comma, red, comma. Can you see that I end with a comma? And then with a final word, you say and orange. So before the final and, you have a comma, then you have the word and you complete the sentence. So you list all the different individual ones, and then before the final one, you insert the word and it must be preceded with a comma. So you're welcome to refer back to this in case you have any challenges. Also, your language editor will also fix this if you slip up by accident. You can also use semicolons to divide or subdivide the points. So if there's multiple points or variables or constructs, you can separate them by using semicolons instead of commas. So that is also an acceptable way. And then bulleted lists are very useful. So also just verify from your department or college how they feel about bulleted lists. But when I review, I sometimes find that looking at bulleted lists, it conveys a lot of information. It's not one long sentence with a lot of information, and it's straightforward and to the point. So that can come in very handy. Here I've got an example for you on paragraph numbering. Paragraph number 1 is a main heading. Main headings normally in capital letters and bold. I would like you to have a look at after the first or the number of the main heading. Can you see that there is a full stop after number 1? If we were dealing with chapter 2, the main heading will start with 2 point. With the first number, the main heading, you insert a full stop. With a first subheading like 1.1, can you notice that after the final number, there's no full stop? The same with a subheading 1.1.1, doesn't end with a full stop. And then the fourth level heading 1.1.1.1, no full stop. I've got here for you in a bubble Note that only the main heading with a single paragraph number ends with a full stop. This is something that you need to remember. Then I want to continue here. Although we are dealing with paragraph numbering, very important, don't use lengthy headings. Try to see how you can shorten the content without losing the essence of the heading or the content. So words like the and and, leave that out of your paragraph headings. Make sure that you summarize the heading or shorten it so that it conveys exactly what the content will be that follows. It also doesn't look good in your table of contents if you have this very lengthy headings. So just make sure you can continue shortening it on your piece of rough work until you get the right version that you would like to use. Okay, headers, tables, and figures. Number one, it should be concise and to the point. A table and a figure conveys important information with one glance. So it's easy for us as reviewers and supervisors to see exactly what the content is to be covered. It should be concise and to the point, consistent with a style. If you decide on one style of tables, please use it throughout your manuscript. Don't think it's fancy to use different styles. It doesn't look professional. The same with figures, especially if you are doing the chapter where you analyze or where you provide the data collection, the findings. Don't try to use different styles for graphs and paragraphs, tables, sorry. Stick to a similar method, because it can look fancy, but it really don't contribute towards the end result of your document. And to be more professional, I advise my students to stick to similar methods throughout the document. Also, if you decided in your tables, for example, that the header row of your table must be colored in light blue. This is just an example. Use the same throughout your document. Don't now use blue and then green and yellow and whatever. It is not a party or a clown circus that we are dealing with. It's an academic manuscript. Choose word order of a header to emphasize the meaning. Now that is the header of a table and a caption of a figure. Make sure that is as short as possible, as I mentioned with the paragraph headings, that it conveys the information that follows. Then, if you deal with the numbering of tables and figures according to a chapter, you can see that the tables I've listed there comes from chapter 5. The figures is included in chapter 2. You start with 5.1 and then you continue. So that is very important, especially when you do the table of figures and table or the table of table contents with your tables, and the content that the headings is not that long and that it flows in the correct order so that the reviewers and the examiners can see exactly that those figures and tables belong to that specific chapter. Emphasis, choose one style to emphasize key terms, for example, italics, bold, or quotation marks. So that is important. Remember that when you use a direct quote from content, you need to put it in quotation marks. We make use of the South African dictionary, but if the content of the quotation, for example, or section that you use is in the UK language, you need to state it exactly as it was. So you don't change it. It must be exactly as the way you found it from your literature source. Also, be careful not to use too many direct quotations, because the examiner is going to make a comment that the candidate was not able to conceptualize the content. So just be careful for that. Tables and figures. Tables are used for summarizing, presenting data, and so forth. Use left alignment and single spacing in the cells. I'm going to use it in the next slide, where I'm going to give you an example. Figures represent or present visualizations. It is easy to see with a glance what the message of or the information of the figure is, instead of working through an entire paragraph. Especially when you have graphs, that is very handy. When you have, what is the other word? Illustrations with organograms and things like that, it really helps to see the picture. Write a sentence about the table or figure. You don't just put in the table or the figure without announcing it. You need to say what is going to follow. So in the paragraph before you present the table or figure, mention that table 5.1 illustrates the statistics for the period 2015 to 2019. That is just an example, so that the reader knows exactly what the content will be of the specific table or figure. Then position of the labels. Table headings must be above the table. This is standardized procedure. Figure labels must be below the figure. I'm also going to present you with an example. Now, the first example is of a table. The paragraph above the table, I just typed in one sentence. Remember, there's going to be a paragraph to explain what follows. You say, for example, table 1.1. Remember that the number of the table must correspond with the exact number of the table. Below presents information about the population of South Africa. So before you present the table, you must have in the sentence the table number and briefly say what is going to follow. It can be a one sentence that or one-liner that you include there. And then table 1.1 is the table heading, and I mentioned population. Then there is 3 columns and 4 rows. So what I did here is, this is my own preference. It depends on your supervisor and it depends on you. If you look at row 2, in the second column, I've got the figure 100, full stop, 00. If you look in the row or the cell just below that, you can see 1,000. Now, what I want you to look at is the decimals are underneath each other. The full stops are underneath each other. The tens, the hundreds, the thousands are underneath each other. That just looks more professional to me. But it's up to you. If you right align that, this is how it looks nice. Some students prefer to center those. It doesn't look that professional because the content are not aligned. It's easier to see it this way. Or if you left align, then again, my advice would be that the decimals are underneath each other. And just to give you an idea, just remember between thousands and hundreds, there need to be a space. So don't just join all of those figures together. There needs to be a space. And then if you look at the last column, you can see all those totals that are included there consist of not more than ones and tens. So it's 50, 10 and 60 is the total. So there's no need for you to move some of those content up and add spaces so that it aligns up. Then you need to provide the source where it comes from. It can derive from literature. I've taken out this, say, for example, from your data analysis chapter. So the source in this case will be your own compilation, or if you compile a table in your literature review where you analyze different articles and the findings of studies, what they found, and authors, you are going to say that in that case, you're not going to list all the authors because you've included it in the table. You are going to say author's own compilation or what the case may be. Just confirm that with your supervisor, how they prefer it. Then if we look at an example of a figure, you can see clearly that I say figure 1.1 below illustrates the data about gender groups in the Department of Labour. So the title of this graph is gender because that is what we deal with. Don't type a lengthy header in your or title in your graphs. Stick to the basics because sometimes I find that my students copy the entire question and we only need a header there. So in the label where you see women is represented in the blue portion or segment of the pie chart, and men and other. Now there's very fancy stuff that you can do that. That is a topic for another day, that is technical editing, which I'm conducting with peers in my section where I'm teaching them about technical editing as well. So I'm not going to go into depth with that because we are dealing with academic writing. Now the source, very important, you are going to include the source as well. Now there's just another example to illustrate and to summarize. Introduce a figure or a table referring to, in this case, Saunders Research Onion is depicted in figure 3.5. Now you can see clearly that we are dealing with this figure in chapter 3. We have already included figure 3.1 to figure 3.4. So you continue numbering, make sure about the numbering. Then you present the figure or the table, and then the caption of the figure, you repeat the number, figure 3.1. It is the Research Onion model, and the author is Saunders et al. Because remember previously you included Saunders and all the rest of the authors. So in this case you can just do et al. And the year of publication. Thereafter, don't just put in a table or a figure. You need to briefly explain what's going on there. So you don't just put it in there. You need to explain what your study will follow. In this case, I say the 6 layers respectively represent, and then you are going to briefly explain the layers, and you say, and this is your study, this is why you are following this different sections. I hope you follow and that I don't go too fast. I know it's a lot of information, but as I said, you can go back to this and familiarize yourself with the content. Then consistency and style. Consistency in styles of bullets. Now, when you insert bullets, use a formal style of bullets. My advice would be to use the round black bullet, and that is a formal one, or you can use the square. That is also formal, but stay clear from things like the question mark or pictures or symbols or all of those. Rather stick to the basics. Also, don't use different styles of bullets throughout your document. That's unprofessional, and it also doesn't reflect that good. Because remember, it's an academic document that you deal with. So my advice to you is stick to the default and the basics and don't mix the styles. Then consistency in first person like we and I, or third person. I do not advise my students to use we and I. My advice to them is to use the researcher surveyed or found or whatever the case may be. It's just safer for me. But if your supervisor prefer that you use we and I, then you use first person when you identify to it. Otherwise, the third person, in my opinion, is the safest way to make use or to refer to. Do not be influenced by publication if you are currently reading, and hence combine a variety of styles, including informal styles. For example, it is important to understand the workplace of your participant. Now, with that, we mean that you are going to use or to read articles, you are going to use other research studies, you are going to read informal articles, newspaper articles. So don't be confused between the different styles. You will have to make sure that you stick to academic writing and that is the standard of your document and the way that you convey information. So the publication that you read must not influence, because you are going to deal with different literature sources. I've got an example here for you. It is important to understand the workplace of your participant. In this case, it is important. Can you see that I didn't abbreviate or join it is? It's not it. It is important to understand the participant's workplace. Can you see that I don't refer to you? I distance myself from your. We refer to the participant's workplace. So that is just an example to illustrate what is conveyed in the third bullet. Spelling and terms. My advice to you will be our software packages, the Office packages. When you install them, the default is automatically US or the American spelling. Try or change the default to RSA or UK dictionary. The simple reason for that is that all your documents will be in that format, so that you don't by accident use the US dictionary and then you have to go back and change all of those Z's, and where, for example, if you have the word color in South Africa or the British way of writing it, we include the U. In the American way of writing it, they have honor without the U, color without the U. So just make sure that you have the right dictionary. So my advice to you is, and that is what I'm doing, all my documents is in the UK dictionary as the default. So that will help you tremendously. Then you need to be wary of consistency. For example, do not use online. Secondly, online as two different words. And then another example is online that is hyphenated. The tendency years ago was online with a hyphen. With all my documents that's language edited, I realized that the hyphen is omitted. So it seems as if it is the latest trend. So just find out about that. Use the same method consistently throughout your document. Then the S or Z, that is exactly where your dictionary comes in. Choose one approach. Do not use customized and organized in the same document. We make use of the UK or RSA dictionary. So in this example, Customized is the South African or UK way of spelling the word. The second example that is in bold there, you can see that it is the US way of writing. But as I mentioned earlier, remember that if you use a direct quotation and it is with a Z, the words, stick to that method. You are not allowed to change that. So just remember that as well. Avoid Americanisms like behavior. I've mentioned that. Color. Use the words like we use it with a U in. Then another example. Don't say XYZ comprises of A and B. The example that I've got there, I've got two, is XYZ consists of A and B, or XYZ comprises A and B. Now, the way of writing this comes with experience. Sometimes we are not sure. Your language editor will also look at things like this, but it is good for you to get into the mode of writing it as concise as possible so that you don't include lengthy words that can be conveyed in a shorter way with as much impact and reveal the meaning of the specific sentence. Then tenses. Tenses is a bit of a problem. Right. Discuss from literature the different content in present tense. Scott in 2007 points out that PQR is characterized by ABC. It's also Scott. And then Tambo in 2012 claims that. So literature is in present tense. However, events that occurred previously and are reported on in the literature should be in past tense. For example, a study was conducted in China. There's your references. Mkhize found that. So the events happened previously and are reported in the literature, and you should reflect it in the past tense. It can be a bit confusing, but just remember this slide. What I can also advise you to do is type this out for you. Type a heading. Literature should be reflected in present tense, and then have two examples for you. And then in a next sentence, events that occurred previously and are reported already in literature should be past tense. So just write that down for you, print it out where you work at your workstation, paste it up against the wall so that you can continuously refer back to that. That is what I do, because I sometimes also get confused and I have to go back and just make sure that I'm on the right track. Then use past tense when discussing your own research. For example, this will happen once you've done your data collection and you reflect on your results and your findings. Results of the experiment demonstrated that findings of the survey were mainly positive. So then you've conducted the study. It's done already. Now you reflect in the past tense on what you found and what happened, what you did. I trust that you follow me because of the fact that there's now interaction with me as the presenter and you, that I hope you follow. I'll see in the comment section where you got lost, and I'll try to address that so that it's clear to you. So keep those comments going, and then we'll try to attend to that if there's still some time left. Be consistent in tenses in the same section. This slip happens very easily when rewriting your proposal as chapter 1. Now, what's going to happen? You are busy with the proposal module of your qualification. At the end of the year, you are going to participate in a colloquium, depending on what is the processes and procedures of the department of where you are enrolled at, and that you conduct your study. So in our department, we are making use of the peer review system, where students submit their final proposals. It is then sent to external and internal subject experts. The proposal is reviewed, feedback is provided, and then there's 3 options. Students can continue to register for the research part of the qualification, or that they have to resubmit the proposal because there's some changes, major changes that needs to be made for re-evaluation, or finally that the proposal is not up to standard and that the student cannot continue. So then, say for argument's sake, your proposal has been accepted and you have the clear message that you can register for your research module. Now you have to use your proposal or parts of your proposal to convert it to chapter 1. The structure is not 100% the same, and there's more content that need to be included. There's certain information that you are not going to include. So just make sure that where you in the proposal phase envisage that you are going to do X, Y, and Z. Now in chapter 1, it's going to be a bit different. And then when you complete it with your study, you will see that you are going to go back to chapter 1 and you are going to reflect on and revise some of those content. What I always tell my students is that we can do chapter 1 and I can approve it up to a certain point, and then once the study has been completed, we revise chapter 1 to make sure that there's a golden thread throughout. Because very often what you envisage and promise to do in chapter 1 might change throughout your project. So this is what I mean by that. Also, just important, I agree, I discuss, you agree, he or she agrees, they agree. So just make sure that you are familiar with this. I'm not going to add some more examples. It's quite straightforward. The participant, because it's one participant, agrees, and then multiple participants or more than one agree. My dog obeys, dogs obey, dog is obedient, dogs are obedient. You catch the drift by now. Then Scott et al. Remember that there is multiple authors. They hold the view, or they are of the opinion that. Then evidence has been found. Evidence is one construct. Evidence have been found is incorrect. Then many of the attributes are common. In this case, M-learning and E-learning are constructed because it's 2 constructs are considered in that particular section. And then you have 1 chapter that you reflect on. This chapter aims to explain. Data can be viewed either in singular or plural form. Both of them is correct. Data is contradictory, or the data are contradictory. So this is one of the rare cases. So you can mention any of the 2, either singular or plural. Hyphens, I mentioned the hyphens earlier in the presentation. When 2 words are used together as an adjective, use a hyphen. In problem-solving situation, I need to call my decision-making skills. Once again, just confirm that with your language editor. If it changed, sometimes they use problem-solving as 1 word or 2 different words without the hyphen. Then when the two words together form a noun, the hyphen is not required. It is, or it's time, or in our case, we are going to say it is time for some decision making. In this case, it is a noun. Subsections, subdivide, rephrase, etc. Current practice is without a hyphen, as mentioned. Earlier years, we would say that subsection, subdivide, and rephrase separated with a hyphen. So just make sure that I'm pretty convinced that your language editor will attend to this as well. But if you use hyphens, make sure that you use it throughout your manuscript. If you decide to go without the hyphens, make sure that that is the format that you follow. Don't mix the two up. Then chapter introductions and conclusions. We start each section or chapter or section with an introduction. The purpose of that is overviews that is in a chapter or a section. When you are dealing with chapter 2, in the introduction, you are going to convey briefly what you've done in the previous chapter in order to link your golden thread. So you don't give a lengthy discussion. You are going to say that I dealt with, say for example, work ethics, that was your chapter 2, and then chapter 3 you are dealing with labor relations. So in the beginning of chapter 3 you're going to say the previous chapter or chapter 2 discussed research or workplace ethics, and then this chapter will discuss A, B, and C, and you provide briefly the structure of the chapter. Then it's very nice to have a theme diagram at the beginning of each chapter that highlights focus of that chapter. I'm going to show an example for you on the next slide. I am very strict on this. My students must provide me with a mind map or chapter outline before they commence the chapter. So, say for example, one of my students submitted a literature chapter and he is now ready to continue with the research methodology chapter. While I'm busy revising and reviewing the literature chapter, he needs to submit to me the framework or structure of the research chapter. When I approve that, he can continue in the meanwhile by compiling the chapter. So I approve the framework or the chapter outline first, and it also makes sure that there's a golden thread and that the students use the funnel approach. Now, the funnel approach is where you start widely by discussing a phenomenon in a wide environment, and you boil and taper it down to where you fix on, or you focus on your problem. So that is the funnel approach. Mention each subsection. For example, 3.1 outlines whatever. Section 3.2 addresses the following. Section 3 and 4 and so forth. So it's important that the reader know exactly what they can expect, and it also keep you or assist you to keep within the framework of a particular chapter so that you don't get lost and wander off. It's important that you create a framework and barriers so that you don't read some content which might not be part of your study and you think, oops, it's going to contribute towards your study, and then it's completely out of context. Then it can be done concisely with parentheses. For example, X, Y, and Z is overviewed in brackets section 3.1, while the next section are listed in section 2.3. So there is 2 examples for you on how to mention and how to introduce the content. I know that this example on the screen is a bit skew. I've scanned it in quite a while ago and it is skew, so I made a snapshot for you. So I apologize. It is just to give you an idea. Now this is a specific chapter and this candidate provided the introduction. Remember I said a chapter must start with an introduction. From the introduction, the candidate gave in the left-hand side a background on occupational health and safety. Now, all the content in the left-hand side of this illustration is the main headings. Then if you look at the arrows, you can see that the first one, background on occupational health and safety, on the left-hand side. From there on, the definition of key terms has been discussed. From there on, the next section. Then if you look in the middle column, you can see that the section on definition of key terms, there is different arrows. Now that is the subsections that has been discussed there. The compliance management framework, occupational health and safety, direct and indirect cost, what's an owner and a manager and what's a small business. Then if you look at the right-hand column, where it mentions moral, legal and financial components, that has been discussed as part of the compliance management framework. So that means it has been boiled down to subsections. So with every main heading or section, you can see that there is arrows that provide the subsections and what is discussed there. So this is just an example for you. You can follow any format. You can have an organigram. In this case, it has been done manually. Provide a chapter outline. It just makes your life easier. And what I advise my students to do is to provide the chapter outline where they introduce the chapter so that they know exactly what is expected. I was still busy with chapter introductions and conclusions. A chapter starts with an introduction, as I mentioned, and it ends with a chapter or a section conclusion, or it can also be a summary, depending on what your supervisor prescribes or your template prescribes from you. And very also important is interpretations and a conclusion. Then explain the role of a chapter that is in your conclusions and also how it relates to upcoming chapters. So at the end of the chapter, you mention that this is the end of this particular chapter. In the next chapter, we are going to deal with A, B, and C. So then in your following chapter, you say in the previous chapter, or you can name the chapter, we have done A, B, and C. In this chapter, we are going to deal with and the rest. So that is the golden thread that we refer to. In general, discussions should occur in a discussion section before the conclusion. So if there is a discussion section, you will find the discussion section, especially in the data analysis chapter and the finding or conclusion and recommendations chapter. So there you will find and use the discussion section. It is not usual to introduce a new point in the conclusion, although there can be exceptions, an appropriate quotation or a reference to a theoretical concept. But in the conclusion, we do not include new content. Referencing and citations. As I said, go to the LIP guides and look at the references and the citations there. It is also not the role of the supervisor to teach students on referencing and citations. You've done that in your honours module, so please just make sure that you upskill yourself and to get the information again. In the first example, there is 2 authors. It's part of a sentence. So you say, for example, Becker and Smith. Remember the word and as part of the paragraph should be written in full, and then the year of publication in brackets. Then authors and dates in parentheses. For example, the Lackaby bird can fly backwards in cold conditions. Now, there's two ways of doing it. It depends on the style, if it's APA style, if it's Harvard, what the case may be. Then the first one is Becker and Smith in 2005. It's normally at the end of a sentence. And then another example is Becker and Smith, where you use the ampersand instead of the word and. Now it depends on the journal guidelines. When to use what. I know for all my articles, it depends on the guidelines. I have to change that several times, especially if an article is rejected and I need to submit it to a new journal. They've got their own ideas and guidelines on what to do. My advice to you is to always include page numbers, not only with direct quotes, for the simple and practical reason that when you write articles from your completed dissertation or thesis, that if the journal requires page numbers, that you do have them at hand. If the journal don't require page numbers, you can easily delete it. So that is something that I learned a very hard lesson on. So it's up to you and your supervisors, but that's my advice to my students. Then the reference is part of a sentence and must come before the full stop. So if you look at the example at the end of the sentence, you have the references. I've got two versions for you there to look at, depending on the style or guide that you have to use. Look at where the full stop is placed at the end of the sentence, not before the end of the sentence, and then you have your references. Okay, referencing and citations. Now for a PhD, cite only original sources as references. So we need original sources as references. I also don't know if you are aware of it, but for PhD students who enrolled from 2021 and onwards, it is prerequisite that you need to submit 2 articles to journals before your qualification can be granted. So initially it was 1, they changed it from this year to 2. So it is important that you familiarize yourself with guidelines of journals as well. This can help you. For master's degree, secondary referencing is okay, but not ideal. Example, a study in 2004 found that A, B, and C, and D, there it is. It comes from Hollard, 2005, which is cited by Klein in 2011. Just make sure that you reference this correctly in your list of references. You can find the information from the LibGuides as well. When you are citing a source just after its previous citation, you don't include the date. I've got an example for you here. I'm going to start halfway in the sentence. Causes a mean weight increase of 15% in female pigs and 10% in males. It's from Neverend and Nguni in 2009. Furthermore, Neverend and Nguni found. It's the same year of publications, so you don't have to repeat that as well. So the furthermore means in addition, that's what they also found. Then avoid multiple consecutive references to the same source. What I also see is that students use one source per paragraph and then they list it several times. Either do it at the beginning of the paragraph or at the end of the paragraph, but don't continue to reference the same reference, page number, and year consecutively in the same paragraph. Stay away from that. And then I've included it here. Include the page number when citing a direct quote. You are familiar with that, or a direct diagram. There is an example for you. You may use the ampersand sign when the full citation is in parentheses. Like, for example, Naidu and Nguni. But when the name flow in a sentence, as in Naidu and Nguni recommend, then you use the word and not the ampersand. Then citation styles can be used at the start of a sentence. For Naidu in 2009, and then the rest of the sentence. And another example is according to Naidu in 2009. Now you can see that this reference is in the beginning of a sentence or a paragraph. The next example is at the end, where you reference the authors at the end. For example, some require Naidu and Nguni at the end of a paragraph. It depends. And also, if you look just after the surname Naidu, can you see that there's a comma before you present the ampersand? Now that depends on the journal and its format. We continue with this. References should be current, including some very recent sources. Now, we normally state 5 years is the norm. But if you refer to seminal work, you need to use the work where it was initially, especially with theories. You need to use the initial date, like Maslow's hierarchy, for example. Don't use a current date there. Use the initial date where it was first published. Now, in this case, bear in mind that by the time that you complete your study, it will be 3 to 5 or 6 years from now on. Then these sources might be outdated. So very often you need to go back to your work you've already done and include newer resources. So just bear that in mind. If you use old resources, it's going to be ancient by the time you send your manuscript for examination. I mentioned about seminal work. It is content that's initially published, and then you use older references. Then a lesson that I learned at the very hard way is keep all your sources, either electronic or printed copies of journal articles, ideally both. The newer generation of people use digital copies. Make sure that you have cloud backup as well, because anything can happen to your computer. It can crash. Make backups very often. Sort your online articles in different folders with different themes to make sure that you've got it, because sometimes when you write an article, you have to refer back to that as well. When you consult a library book or a borrowed book, my advice to you is make a copy or scan in the cover page of the book, the second page with the title and where it's published, and the third page where you find the authors as well as where it is published and the date of publication, and then the content that you scan in or copy. So make sure that you have that, otherwise you have the content of the book and then you have no clue where you got it from. So just make sure that you have those information with you. Acronyms, the first time you present an acronym in a document, you write it in full and then in bracket the acronym. From that point onwards, you use only the acronym. Don't mix the full full words and the acronym. Don't mix it up. Stick then to the acronym. You are going to have a list of acronyms and abbreviations in the beginning of your document. Also with your proposal, provide that as well. And you are going to include that as well. Don't just fire away with the acronym and the reader has got no idea what it means. Then I've mentioned about the list of acronyms up front. Some people provide it at the end of the chapter or the proposal. My advice would be to introduce it at the beginning so that the reader knows exactly what's going on. Then very important, and something that the majority of you don't know, for numbers from 1 to 9, you need to write it in words. 10 and above, you can use the figure. In a sentence, don't start a sentence with numbers. When your sentence commences with a number, start or write it in full. There's an example, it's just a repetition of what I've already said. For percentages, there's different ways of doing it. You can say 45% and then in brackets use the digits with a percentage sign. That is just a very nice way to present it. If 45% is at the beginning of the sentence, you have to write it in full. Just to cover that section, participants and gender. Now this is a very difficult topic, the gender one. Years ago, we referred to him and she, or hers or whatever. Now there's different gender groups. So we must make sure that we don't step onto the toes of the different gender groups. So in your questionnaire, if you have to have a gender question, which is not always advised, depending on your study, you would identify male, female, and then all those acronyms for other groups, and then you include other as well. So it is safer to use the word they and their. It's just safer. In words, phrases, and terms, this is just something for you. You need never be at a loss for words again. See the list in Word document that I'm going to send to you, informal or informal tips for academic writing. I'll also avail that to you. Or use the online thesaurus for synonyms. Just make sure that the synonym that you choose fit into the content of the specific sentence that you make use of. We very often see that students at random choose a fancy synonym and then it doesn't convey the right information that it should for that particular sentence. Then I included for you different types of verbs. I'm not going to go through all of this. Firstly, I want to alert you to the fact that we have neutral verbs. For example, the author says, note, believe, observe, or comment. So you can refer back to this, make yourself a printout, and also put it up where you work. That will help you a great deal, that you don't use say or says several times over and over again. So these are the neutral verbs. Then the stronger verbs, the author agrees, rejects, argue, or compares. These will definitely be used in a PhD study. So make sure that you familiarize with these. An example of inference verbs, the author implies, suggests, and thinks. I hope that this will help you while you are busy compiling your proposal, and also for those of you who are busy with your study, also to assist you to think out of the box and to guide you. Literature study. General integrate sources in a literature study. Don't use 1, 2, or 3, and then very often we see that these references are very old. I'm busy reviewing an article for a journal, and almost all the articles and content from the literature review dated from 2010 and later than that. So that is not acceptable. The question to me as a reviewer is, what happened since then? So always ask yourself that question. Is there something new, changes, any interventions that took place? One accepted style is to put a citation or a reference after each point or sentence. So it depends. If you integrate several resources or themes, it can be combined in bracketed list at the end of the paragraph, or when you say Van Antwerpen said this, comma, Brown in 2009 mentioned this, and then Dube in 2018 exaggerate that. So then there's multiple authors in one sentence. So that is another way, and we also expect that with PhD studies, so that you integrate several sources. Avoid a series of paragraphs devoted to the work of one particular author. We find that very often. If we use a model or concept by a certain author as the basis of your research, it's fine to devote a lengthy section to that single author. So just distinguish between the two options there. So it depends. Still, literature studies. It's important that in a literature review to refer not only to definitions and key concepts, but to discuss later or related work, other similar studies. That can help you to identify the gap in knowledge or in the body of knowledge, to give you a rationale and motivation for the topic that you are investigating. It is not unusual in literature studies to give one's own opinions or refer to one's own research while reporting the literature. But if you need to do so, have a subject or subheader, application to the present study. So just bear that in mind. They have a problem, journals where researchers continuously cite their own work. So they have an issue with that because they say that authors just want to boost their citations. So just be careful of that as well. It's important when you construct, customize, or adapt a model or a framework, set of criteria or set of principles to use in your own work. If you adapt a model, make sure that you say that you are adapting the model or the framework or criteria. It is important that you mention that, otherwise it's plagiarism. Still, literature studies, we've mentioned the discussion can address various approaches. In certain research, literature studies also provide certain form of data that is referred to in the literature study as secondary data, especially reports or things like that. Primary data refers to data that you collect from your measuring instrument that you are going to reflect on. Now, the difference between secondary and primary data. Then I mentioned previously that you might want to consolidate a section with a table of points that will be your underlying principles, criteria, and guidelines to say that you've read up on these studies and this is what they found on a similar topic, the year and the authors and the findings in a tabular format, because that can give the reader an idea that you read widely, what is available on your topic, and also be able to identify gaps in previous studies, as well as what is available in literature study. That can also be the start of your own synthesized framework or model. It is expected of PhD students to come up with a framework or a model. Now, the difference between it is a model needs to be tested. So we mainly refer to a conceptual framework because it must be tested in industry first before we can refer to it as a model. When you start the empirical work, repeat the table with your columns, practical implications for your own research. For example, your golden thread. That must go throughout your study. Now, when you submit a section of proposal to a supervisor, Sometimes supervisors want the entire proposal. Sometimes they break it down to certain parts and sections that you need to submit. That will depend on your supervisor and your agreement. The sense of relief when a draft is done. Normally, the M&D policy prescribes that you are allowed to submit 3 drafts of the proposal. Now, you are ready to submit, and once you submit it via email to your supervisor, you are relieved and think, okay, you are now out of the woods. It is now the problem of the supervisor. And you start looking around for what else there is that you can do to keep you occupied. It is a sense of a relief to send your work to your supervisor, but it's also stressful. So make sure that what you send to your supervisor is of a good quality, so that when you receive it back, there's not as many comments. So make sure that you provide anything to the best of your ability. Automatically, when you submit it and it's not of a good quality and layout, the supervisor struggle to focus on the content of what you would like to convey. It's distracting and the supervisor is already negative. So please make sure that you don't make yourself guilty on that. Supervisors should concentrate only on academic content and the holistic picture. It's not our task to do language correction. I don't mean 1 or 2 instances, but if there's a lot of spelling mistakes and content that is not reflected correctly and your referencing style, that is really an irritation. So please don't submit work like that. As well as technical editing, read, reread, and the draft meticulously before sending it to your supervisor. You need to reflect, self-evaluate, and redefine. Still on this point, supervisor identified too many mistakes, technical errors, duplication of content, repetition of the same word. They might return it for corrections and resubmission before they give feedback on content. So my advice to you is don't make yourself guilty. In the beginning years when I started my role as supervisor, I went through the entire document and provide inputs. Now, when I reach a certain point and there's too many errors and flaws, I immediately say that I refuse to continue with the revision of this chapter until all of these previous matters have not been addressed to, because it's not my role and my job as supervisor to edit your document. However, when the draft doesn't have extensive number of mistakes, supervisors will advise on language improvements to make it easier for them to assess content in the next round. If this happens, it helps, it's a bonus, but it also slows down the review process. Then I included there for you, language editing is an expensive exercise. It's normally conducted before the manuscript is examined. You need to budget for this, please. If you apply for a bursary, make ample provision for language editing because it's quite expensive. Some supervisors require their students to send each chapter to language editing before they review it. It depends on your supervisor. Language edited, the proposal should be language edited by an accredited language editor before you can submit for the colloquium. How do you locate a language editor? I heard horror stories and I dealt with horror stories myself. Language editing, there is an accredited guild for language editors. See if you can allocate, look at the reviews. Also find out from graduate studies if they can recommend language editors. Don't just take anybody that claims that they are a language editor. They need to be skilled in academic language editing as well. Tips for checking: reread a document after completing it, eliminate and language edit, and technical editing to issues such as numbering, table numbering. Check the structure. Pretend you are someone reading it for the first time. Make sure that you understand what you are conveying. Some content fit better in another section. Ask yourself that question. If that is the case, either create another subsection or shift the paragraph where it belongs. Then are the links and the relationships between sentences and sections clear? Has the same terminology be used for the same concepts throughout? Make sure that you use the same and that you don't alternate. Otherwise, they are going to wonder exactly what you are meaning. How is the sequence of a paragraph? How can it be improved? If you are making a point, does the sequence support your argumentation or your arguments? Is there a lead sentence? Now, lead sentence set the tone for what can be expected in your chapter. When you reread it, you find a sentence that set things out so well that it might mean that you would like to move it to the front section of your paragraph. The first sentence must make a punch up front. Reread the sentence. Ask yourself, is it logic? Does it make sense? Does it convey the information you would like it to convey? If we look at scientific writing, it should be factual. Findings should be reported objectively. It should not contain generalizations. Inaccurate statements, that means things that you see in the workplace, there's no evidence to back it up. Allegations and sweeping statements, I have indicated that to you previously. Avoid exaggerated remarks. Results from the project could be used to revolutionize. You can see that it's exaggerated. Stay clear from that. No slang, vulgar or popular use of language is allowed. Then express yourself concisely. H.G. Wells says or said, I write as I walk because I want to get somewhere. And I write as straight as I can because that is the shortest way of getting there. So keep this in mind, the shortest way of conveying your message. That's what I've explained now. Avoid long essays and paragraphs. At postgraduate level, students need to formulate their viewpoints academically and scientifically. You are not writing an essay, and writing essays should serve as good practice for academic writing. There's a lot of content available on Google, scientific discussions on academic writing. Just see how to formulate a paragraph that can guide you as well. A long research or business report is not an indication of academic excellence. Never try to pad your research script or scientific article with extra information just to get a lengthier document. The right length is related to the integration of sources and the ability of you to master the studied literature. How to integrate theory and theory with research results meaningfully. You should be able to do that. Remember, theoretical, that's secondary knowledge, must be integrated before you can do primary data collection and to reflect on that. This is the process through which the body of knowledge is built within your specific research or subject field. The researcher must first conceptualize his or her current research by giving the theoretical background and where current research falls flat. Now that means you need to plan, you need to do a lot of reading, and you must be able to identify any gaps. The essence of this part of academic writing style, you should be able to integrate any secondary research that is already available in the public domain written by scholars. The viewpoints of authors on a specific subject, that is your secondary knowledge, that is part of your literature review, must be integrated. You must be able to assess, to analyze, to synthesize, and to compile. Now, this is extremely important for students on PhD level, because that means the outcomes that you need to achieve on NQF level 10. Additional integration guidelines. It's unnecessary to invent the wheel. It is not necessary to describe a phenomenon from square one. Just mention what it is and explain the essence of it. You don't write pages and pages and pages. Mention that you understand it, what is the essence of it, and where it leads to, and why it is applicable to your study, and why it needs to why it does comply with the aims of and objectives of your study. Why is it necessary to include that phenomenon in your study? When a topic is discussed in your study, different viewpoints from different sources must be compared. That is where a table comes in handy. It will just help you to keep track and to see where is any possible gaps and knowledge that you need to find out in your study. Must be evaluated and integrate. How does it differ from other authors? I mentioned that the table is helpful to give you a clear picture. For example, two authors identify 5 concepts of a phenomenon, but a third author adds 2 or more components. Now you need to use this discussion or argument to form your own point of view. There is just an example for you. Points of views from a number of authors. Van Antwerpen in 2015, there's the page number, and Bruins in 2005 identified 2 types of survey. Then in Dube in 2010, you can see the timeline. However, adds another field of survey technique, namely controlled surveys. This is how it differs. So you reflect on that and you add that to your study so that we know exactly where there's similarities and differentialities. Right. Compare the viewpoints of different authors. I've just mentioned that 2 authors differ from each other. Use it as view of discussion and to form your own point of view on this. Why is it important? Why does it contribute? Why do you include that in your study? And then also, what is your opinion? There is also just an example. I'm not going into depth with this one. It's just another example where different authors differ from one another. So what I've got for you there is the example and what they say. Just look at the second sentence. In contrast to this, Black mentioned something else. Then write something. There's an example of how to write it. And also I've got advice for you here. Formulate in this way the information which has been studied is applied to the present study. The information has been addressed, synthesized, and integrated into your research report. Show that you've consulted a number of authors on the same topic. You must be able to demonstrate that you've read extensively on a specific topic and that you are able to integrate all the different information. I've got examples for you there. It is similar to examples that I've mentioned on the previous 2 slides. You can go through that on your own. So there's 2 examples, and then I just said there with the word note, the list of authors is in alphabetical order, or your guidelines can be, or from the journal, that it must be according to the year of publication. So just make sure of that and find that out from your supervisor. Then systematic presentation by means of meaningful headings. Your headings is very important. I also indicated previously in the slideshow how it should be presented when it's capital letters, bold and italics, the levels of numbering and subunits. Make sure that you have meaningful headings, that it's not too long. that it briefly provide the reader with exactly what they can expect in the discussion below the heading. Also, the headings indicate how the student understood, processed and presented the theory and empirical part of the research study after taking aims, objectives and proposed hypothesis of the study into account. Then additional guidance of meaningful headings. The study must be structured meaningful. Different headings that is presented according to themes, aims or goals, objectives, then hypothesis or research questions of the research that will be undertaken. The goals are broad, long-term and overall targets, whereas objectives are specific, short-term, measurable and achievable. Then, the title consists of several concepts and constructs, or referred to as building blocks, which have appearing on the research question or the problem. Then, when conceptualizing the study within that particular theoretical framework of the research, the major concepts, constructs and sub-constructs should be explained. Remember, when somebody examines your work, they might not be as clued up in your specific study field, or there's something that they are not familiar with. So make sure that all the concepts have been included in your study and that you reported on that as well. That is where subsections come in handy, that is dedicated to each of the constructs that is included in the study. Be comprehensive and use recent and applicable information. I've touched on that, and I also explained to you what the reality is, that you are busy now with your study. When you finish or complete your study, some of that information is outdated. So that is the reason why you need to make sure of recent theories, models that is appropriate to your subject matter, that is not ancient work. When it's seminal work, make sure that you reflect on that. When you use conclusions, you need to prove your insight. It arises from your research. This is the place where you can show your academic skills and what you've learned. Some researcher or assessors or examiners read chapter 1 first, and then they go to the conclusion chapter to see if there's a golden thread and if the student understood exactly what he or she was busy with while conducting the research. So it is important that everything ties up together with your golden thread, and that is the opportunity where you show how you have grown as an academic. Draw your own query and logical conclusions and formulate them in your own words on the actual findings and theoretical foundations. You are not allowed to add new theoretical information to the conclusion. I alert you to that fact already. There you can refer back to theory as you've outlined it in your literature chapter. So you can just link it to that, but you don't introduce new concepts. Important to be accurate. You as a researcher should be a scientist in the true sense of the word. So academic and scientific research must be meticulous. You need to apply this principle throughout your research and the reporting of your research as well as your findings. That will be your contribution towards the body of knowledge. Then 10 tips to improve academic writing. Now, this is only a guide. Write to the level of the intended audience. You need to build on the past, get to the point, take a stand, provide supporting evidence, inform your audience, avoid literally cliches, show a little style. You need to edit and edit it. Proofread leads to perfect results. So this is also a slide that you can print for yourself, laminate it and put it up for you for easy reference. Then, in a world where people are constantly writing on informal platforms, such as blogs, social media, it's very normal for young academics to feel hesitant as to whether they are striking the proper tone in their formal writing. Ultimately, it is only through experimentation and practice that you will find the form that best suits your work. I've got references that I've used here that you are welcome to look to compile the presentation. Some is from my own experience. You will notice that throughout the presentation, I shared with you my own experiences and how I deal with it as an academic, also as a researcher, also as a supervisor. And then what I've included for you here is helpful YouTube videos. I wrote the title of the YouTube videos for you there, and I've also looked at all of them. They are academically sound. It's made by sound academics and not somebody who just compiled something. So it will help you a great deal if you look at that. Especially the younger generation, they quickly go to online sources. Don't underestimate the value of Google Scholar. If you make use of Google Scholar, you will see that some of the articles is published in open source journals. That means you can open the article. Also, you don't have to pay for it. Some of them you need to request from your library or through a library search. Some of them you need to pay for. So it depends on that as well. With regard to Google Scholar, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that platform, but there is parameters that you can set, that you only want research and articles that's published from, for example, 2015 to 2020. Then you get recent articles. If you don't set that parameter, you might deal with research that's quite dated and old. So I don't know how familiar some of you are with the use of Google Scholar and how to get the information that you are looking for. Very important, as I mentioned throughout the presentation, that in academic writing, don't forget the golden thread. It must read from the beginning to the end. You must be able to determine what is the essence of the study, what needs to be conveyed, and what the study is about. I also advise my students to remind the reader almost in every chapter what the research question is, what the aims are, and exactly where the study is heading to. So just to remind the reader what the study is about. When we examine dissertations and theses, we start from the beginning, and it sometimes happens that for a week you can't assess, and then you go on with the examination process, and that you might lose track. So in order to ensure that there is a golden thread, as I mentioned, you can use your research question in every chapter, how you are going to address that, and just make sure that the people know exactly. Now, in your proposal that you are busy compiling, make sure that you lead the reader and the people who's going to review your proposal at the end of the day know exactly. There is one section where we also comment on language proficiency, technical editing. So that forms part of an academic writing style and referencing. So that forms part of the grid that we make use of or the matrix to assess the proposal. Right, it's none of their business that you have to learn how to write. Every writer I know has trouble with writing. The scariest moment is always just before you start. Never, never, never give up. A writer is a person for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. Now I want to, before I give you time for questions, I want to share with you something that happened to me. When I was busy with my master's degree, we haven't had a proposal phase and the initial research phase. We had to submit our proposal. When it was approved, we continued with the study. So we didn't in that time. A few years ago, there wasn't colloquiums. It was reviewed by 2 or 3 academics, and then they gave the green light, and then we go on. When I was done with my data collection, and I completed the conclusion and recommendation chapter, it was almost time that I had to submit my final product for examination. My supervisor mentioned to me that my study is a fruit salad of concepts. And I had to sit back and I had to redo. I had 4 questionnaires. I had to redo all the measuring instruments and the data collection. That was quite a shock to me because I've done all this work and I wanted to finish within 3 years. So she said that this is a bit of a problem. So I had to overcome that problem and to make sure that I don't repeat the same. But I never received guidance from the beginning. My supervisor was not involved. So it is important that you have a good relationship with your supervisor, that if you are not sure, that you rather consult your supervisor and verify and make sure that you are on the right track. With the PhD students, we expect them to know exactly what they are doing and to work independently. With master students, we guide them so that they learn what is research and how to conduct research. So that is the difference between the two. So that is why you have supervisors that should be available to assist you. Please don't keep quiet and that you are wasting time, and follow the lead and the guidance of your supervisors, who is the expert in the field. Also make sure that when you submit draft 1 of your proposal, you have to submit a Turnitin report. I think you are dealing with that somewhere in the workshops. And then you have 3 opportunities to do the Turnitin report. You submit that with your proposal, and then when we review the second draft of your proposal, we open draft 1 again to make sure if the candidate applied the feedback and concerns of the supervisor. So that is, we are here to help you and attend as much training as possible, especially if you are almost done with your study. There's always things that you can learn. So the university provide a lot of training interventions. Make sure that you attend that and that you learn, or that you read and listen to the recording. And we also provide, as far as possible, additional material for you. That is my story.